The air tastes of iron and ash, and every breath cuts like broken glass. I remember the sky before it was eaten. A vault of blue now drowned beneath the writhing shadow of the swarm. My auspex stutters with the sound of wings that aren't wings at all, but living blades grinding against the upper atmosphere. We had been told that the Emperor protects, but the Emperor's light does not reach this deep into the void. I can feel the static crawl beneath my skin. I can smell the fear. Not mine, but theirs. The 100 sealed inside the manufactorum below, whispering prayers into the humming dark as the world begins to die. If my signal endures beyond this night, let it be carried through the void as offering, a lit spark amid the endless chitin tide. Record this transmission, that the truth of this world's unmaking may serve as both warning and devotion. The lumen hum was the first thing to change. Not the explosions, not the vox chatter, those came later. It was the hum that warned me, that long electrical whine running through the conduits above the barracks, trembling like a living nerve. It grew in pitch until every plate of my armor vibrated with it, and then it stopped. Silence, complete surgical silence before the sky opened. We had spent months preparing for what Command called a Category Black contact. None of us had seen one before. We joked about it during rations, called it just another orc raid, just another heretic uprising. But when the silence came, and the air itself began to taste like blood, I understood why the chaplain forbade us from naming the enemy. To name it was to invite it, and I had spoken its name a dozen times in jest. Tyranid. The word rolled like gravel in the mouth. Too alive to be language, too deliberate to be mere sound. The auspex began to die one by one. Red lights blinked out, replaced by the static hiss of biosignature overloads. The Vox officer, poor Merrill, slapped his console again and again until the sparks burned his gloves. I remember his voice breaking through the noise, screaming that the upper atmosphere was raining organisms. Organisms. That was the word he used. Not ships. Not ordnance, organisms. Then the impact alarm sounded, and the first spore ships fell through the clouds like burning comets trailing living flame. I ran outside, my boots slipping in the mud of half-melted snow. The horizon was a curtain of green fire. Every explosion bled. The ground itself seemed to weep resin where the spores struck. The air turned thick and sweet, nauseating like meat left too long beneath the sun. The guard line opened fire without orders, last beams tracing desperate red veins across the darkness. We could not see what we were shooting at, only movement, too fast, too fluid, as if the shadow itself had teeth. The Vox crackled with overlapping screams. "They're inside the perimeter," someone shouted. But there had been no breach, no wall to cross. The perimeter was gone because the planet itself had been rewritten. Everything organic was a door, and the swarm had keys for all of them. I saw the first wave, termagants, their carapaces slick with acid, their limbs moving like the pistons of a factory built for slaughter. Behind them came the skyborne gargoyles, shrieking with the sound of ruptured air sacs, and above all that chaos, the clouds pulsed with something vast, unseen, but awake. We fell back toward the manufactorum district. The air there was already thick with smoke from the Prometheum reserves, a haze that blurred the difference between friend and foe. Sergeant Wren shouted orders, his voice cutting through the din like a bolt round. We regrouped in the shadow of a broken Titan's leg, its rusting plates still marked with the sigil of Legio Solaria. Once a god machine, now a tomb. Its reactor had long been dead, but we huddled beside it anyway, as if its ghost could still protect us. A child ran past us then, barefoot, her skin glowing faintly where the spores had kissed it. She was screaming, but no sound came out, just the movement of her lips forming prayers that no longer worked. I tried to reach for her, but the ground split open between us. Not from ordnance, not from quake. The street itself was being eaten, digested by something that pulsed beneath the surface like muscle fiber contracting. The child vanished in the fisher's light. I tasted copper on my tongue. The air was vibrating again, and for a moment I thought it was the lumen hum returning. But no. It was the Hive Fleet song, the psychic chorus that presses against the mind like a scream turned inward. I felt my thoughts splinter under it, my memories blurring into something wet and hot and frightened. I slammed my helmet against the wall just to remember who I was. Trooper Loren Vex, 117th Palatine Infantry, 2nd Company, attached to the Planetary Defense Force. Orders hold until extraction. Extraction that would never come. The swarm had already taken orbit. The bombardment began with a sound so low it bent the bones. Spore pods the size of hab blocks fell in patterns too precise to be random. Every impact left a crater that bled biomass into the air. The ground trembled as feeder organisms rooted into the crust, beginning the world's consumption. The air grew hotter. The lumen hum returned faintly through the metal walls. But this time it wasn't Imperial machinery. It was the sound of digestion, of energy transfer on a planetary scale. We fired until the barrels of our laser guns glowed. Plasma rounds tore open the night, illuminating glimpses of creatures that shouldn't exist. One of the larger beasts, a Carnifex, tore through a column of habs like they were paper. Its roar was physical. I could feel it in my teeth. Sergeant Ryn fired a grenade into its mouth. The explosion painted the street in steam and viscera, but when the smoke cleared, the Carnifex was still moving, half its face missing, the other half already healing. Someone began reciting the litany of endurance over the Vox, voice trembling but clear. By the throne's light we endure, by his will we resist. The chant spread, broken, desperate, human. I joined in, not out of faith but rhythm. Because to stop speaking was to hear the hum again, and I feared that sound more than death. When the second wave came, we didn't even raise our weapons. We just fired blindly into the dark, praying that something, anything, would burn before it reached us. The third impact took the hab crown off the manufactorum like a knife taking the scalp off a skull. Roof beams folded inward, spearing furnaces, and a cough of white-hot air rolled over us, tasting of burnt oil and scorched bone. I followed Ryn through a hinge of collapsed plating into the assembly nave, boots clanging on a catwalk that had once marched servitors to their stations in docile pairs. Now the machines were drunk on static. Mechanical arms twitched without targets, stamping phantom rivets into a conveyor that no longer moved. A lone servitor hung from a chain, jaw working through a looped subroutine as sparks crowned its bald skull. Its Vox grill chattered one phrase torn from some worker's catechism: "Productivity is piety." It said it again as a shower of dust fell, and then again, each repetition growing softer under the hum rising through the floor like the breath of a sleeping behemoth. Merrill stumbled to my side, one hand still glued to his cracked handset. His eyes were rimmed raw where the seals had failed against the spore fog. "Orbital is gone," he rasped as if saying it could make it untrue. "Fleet reports." Static swallowed the rest, but I read the shape of the words in the tremor of his throat. Reports terminated. He held the handset to his ear anyway, like a relic. We were all guilty of that. The things we clutched when the world ended said more about us than any oath we'd ever spoken. Ryn kicked open a blast door and the heat hit us like a wall. The casting floor sprawled beneath, a forest of crucibles and gantries laced with walkways. Promethium from ruptured lines puddled in black lakes that reflected the ceiling in trembling fragments. Skitari lay where they had fallen at their posts, augmetic limbs still spitting warning pips in neat dying rhythms. A tech priest Magos remained upright by simple rigidity, mechadendrites anchored through grating. He rotated his head toward us in a noise of sand against glass and tried to bless our passage with a burst of Binaric that came out as a broken chord. Rin bowed his helmet. I did the same. The Omnissiah had not abandoned the Manufactorum. The Manufactorum had been fed to something bigger. We crossed on a lattice that rang under our weight. Below, the first feeder organisms had already rooted, pale trunks thrusting from ruptured pores in the floor, their surfaces veined with pulsing ichor. They swayed with a motion that matched the hum so perfectly I could not tell which led the dance. If I looked too long, the rhythm entered my jaw, made my teeth count beats until numbers lost meaning. I forced my gaze up to the far wall where the emergency cogitator station used to be. A slab of ceramite lay half across it like a toppled altar. Beneath the slab a hand moved. We jumped. The heat peeled at my faceplate as I dropped. I wedged my shoulder under the edge and pushed until my spine popped. Rin hauled with me, raw breath in my ear. The slab rose a hand's width, then two. A face slid into view, cheeks slick with coolant, lips chewed bloodless to keep silent. Colonel Harvin Thay, 117th Command. I'd seen him only at parade distance, lean as wire. A string of campaign studs on his brow like a second set of eyes. Those eyes were milky now with the fumes. But when they found Rin, their focus returned like a knife coming clean from a whetstone. You will take it, he said, and his voice shocked me because it was almost calm. He wrenched a data slate from under his chest. The screen spidered but still alive with green text. Orders, routes, codes for the orbital grid, if anyone lives to reach a functioning uplink. You don't fire. You don't aim. You run. His breath hitched and something inside him gave way with a wet click. If command falls, you go to the cathedral sublevels. Custodian relay, rumor, not promise. But a rumor is a bridge when the only river is fire. Rin tried to argue, and Thay made a sound that turned the conversation into obedience. We dragged the slab aside. What was left of him came with it, all sinew and shredded cloth. He pushed the slate against my breastplate with a motion that trembled only once. Name, he said. And though we both knew it, he made me say it aloud as if the sound could nail me to myself. Lauren Vex, I answered, and the data slate felt like a second heartbeat when it locked to my mag plate. The far doors blew inward before we could lift him. Something thin and tall slid through the smoke and stopped, the way a shadow stops when it realizes it has been seen. The lictor's chameleonic sheen failed for a heartbeat as it tested the heat, and in that heartbeat its silhouette wrote itself into my marrow. Long-limbed, talons drooling, feeder tendrils tasting our breath. It didn't announce itself with a roar. It smiled without a mouth and moved. Rin fired first. His shot lanced the fog, struck metal. The lictor was not there. It was everywhere else. The catwalk behind us screamed as talons sheared bolts the size of my wrist. A Skitari's corpse stood upright for a last sacramental second, then folded neatly in half. I spun on the spine of panic and brought my laser gun up at the exact moment a weight like winter dropped behind me. I didn't aim. I didn't think. I fired 3 times into heat. A claw closed on my pauldron and squeezed. Ceramite fracturing with a sound I will hear again when my last sleep comes. Merrill slammed his Vox in mad courage against a limb that moved too fast for the eye. The handset exploded into shards. The tech priest saved us. Not through intention perhaps, but through a reflex older than prayer. His mechadendrites still anchored through the grating, spasmed in a perfect burst of machine code pattern, clamping and releasing in a sequence I could not translate even if I had 1,000 years. The grating under the lictor jumped as a surge rippled its length. For the same half-second that had given us its shape, it slowed. Rin stepped into that space and put a grenade under its breastbone. The blast slammed me into a pillar. I lost the gun. I found my feet. We ran. We did not carry Colonel Thay. We carried the slate he had given me, which might as well have been his second heart. I felt the wrongness of it the way you feel an unhealed fracture in bad weather. As we tore along the catwalk, a curtain of sparks stitched the air behind us where the lictor's talons raked iron. I smelled its breath for a whole corridor, sweet as rotting fruit. The hum climbed the walls like ivy and burrowed into the skin over my ribs. My name felt thinner with every step. A thread stretched over a wheel. We crashed through a service hatch into a maintenance shaft. It plunged like a throat between walls where grease and prayer oil had made a black river. Rin went first, then me, then Merrill. Behind us the hatch buckled. I slid in oil up to my knees, palms skidding across embossed catechisms. Every third rung was missing, torn out to make a pattern I didn't want to understand. When we reached the bottom, the shaft opened into a corridor lit only by emergency strips. Their lumen hum a thin, familiar whine poured into a poisoned cup. The noise steadied my breath. I could pretend, for a step, that we were back in barracks and the day had not yet broken. We angled toward the cathedral because there was nowhere else left on the map that wasn't already singing in the Hive Fleet's key. The Cathedral of St. Elian Tower had no relics of gold worth stealing, and no reliquary brighter than the stained smoke smearing its windows, but it had sub-levels, and the colonel's rumor had teeth. We followed arrows etched by pilgrim knives, the little scratched aquilas pointing like the hands of scared children. Twice we passed doorways that breathed. Twice we did not look. In a corridor where the floor rose with the slow tidal flex of something waking, Merrill's strength finally abandoned him. He leaned against a wall and slid down with a sound that was not speech. I knelt, trying to anchor him with touch, with the weight of my palm on his pauldron, with the stupid, stubborn gravity of my body saying stay. He blinked up at me and laughed, a small broken thing. "Still have the handset," he said as if it were a joke, and showed me the ruin of plastic and wire like a saint's finger bones. I almost told him to drop it, but who was I to demand a man shed the last tool that convinced him he could still speak to someone who could answer? The corridor ended in a gate that hadn't been opened in a century. The sigil of the Adeptus Ministorum loomed above, half mawed by corrosion. I laid the slate against the lock in the childish hope that a miracle could be summoned by proximity alone. Rin pried at the mechanism with the same knife he had used to eat ration bricks since before I earned my stripes. The hum gathered in the hinges. I pressed my ear to the metal and heard something large move on the other side, not with the scuttle of claws but with the patience of weight, as if masonry itself were changing its mind about being stone. We had one charge left in Rin's Melta. We had one rumor. We had 3 heartbeats between the lictor's return and whatever waited in the dark behind the gate. "On my mark," Rin said, and I could not tell if the tremor in his voice was fear or prayer. The charge detonated, turning the gate into a burst of molten light and shrieking iron. The blast washed over us in a single breathless second of blindness. When sight returned, the way ahead gaped open, a cathedral throat leading into the dark belly of St. Elian Tower. Smoke and molten dust drifted through the air like snow. The sound that followed was not an echo but a sigh, ancient and relieved, as though the structure itself had wanted to open for us all along. We plunged through the breach. The first thing I noticed was the temperature drop. It was colder than any natural chill. A cold drawn from depth and absence rather than wind. The hum followed us down, muffled but insistent. It had changed tone again, lower, heavier, almost mournful. I tried not to listen, but there's a point when silence is worse than noise. And I found myself matching my breathing to the rhythm of that subterranean pulse. The sublevels were built for shelter once, carved during the earliest days of the colony, when the ecclesiarchy feared rebellion more than Xenos. Every wall bore scripture scored by hand. Faith is the armor of the soul. The Emperor watches, though you cannot see him. I ran a gloved hand across one line as we passed, feeling the uneven cuts, the tremor of whoever had written it, maybe a century ago. The words seemed carved for us now, though I could not tell if that comforted or condemned me. Merrill lagged behind, his breath rasping through the vox filters in shallow bursts. Rin tried to push him forward, muttering that the lictor wouldn't stop, that it would keep following until there was nothing left to follow. He wasn't wrong. The air behind us carried that strange sweet scent again, honey and rot. The spore fog had followed through the cracks in the world. The stairs turned, spiraling deeper. Candles burned in rusted holders, their wax long hardened into stalactites. At the landing below, the cathedral's inner sanctum waited, or what was left of it. The floor had been torn open not by bombs but by growth. A lattice of bone and chitin spread like roots across the stone, pulsing faintly with inner light. At its center a shape hung suspended. Once human, now cocooned in translucent resin that still reflected the shape of a priest's robes beneath. His lips moved impossibly, and the sound that came from him was not a voice but a whispering swarm of syllables that never belonged to any prayer I'd ever known. Rin froze. Merrill made the sign of the Aquila, his hands trembling too much to meet properly. I found myself whispering the first line of the benediction of light, but the words felt hollow, brittle. The hum beneath the floor seemed to mock me, to breathe in rhythm with the prayer as though completing it in its own alien language. We circled the cocoon cautiously. Every step echoed too loudly. I wanted to believe we were alone, but the shadows moved wrong. Not fluid, not natural, they shivered with intelligence. When I turned my light that way, there was nothing but smoke. Rin pointed toward a side door half sunken under debris. That's the access to the relay tunnels, he said. If the colonel's rumor holds, the custodian signal should originate somewhere below there. His voice cracked on the word custodian. It was not a name men like us spoke lightly. To say it here in this desecrated place felt close to blasphemy, yet hope makes heretics of us all. Merrill coughed violently and something wet hit the inside of his visor. He tore the helmet off, gasping. His skin was mottled, pale, almost translucent, tiny veins crawling just beneath the surface. "Spore burn," Rin muttered. He started to reach for a medkit, but Merrill pushed him away. "No use," he said. "Filters failed hours ago." His voice was strange now, the syllables soft, elastic, as though his mouth was forgetting how to form them. I wanted to argue, to say something human, but the hum grew louder and drowned thought. The walls began to tremble again, dust drifting down like gray snow. I felt the vibration rise through my boots, up my spine, until even my teeth sang. Then, I understood. This wasn't just the hive's rhythm anymore. Something enormous was moving above, the feeder ships descending through the atmosphere, their tendrils spearing into the crust. The digestion phase had begun. Rin turned toward the relay access. "We move now," he said, voice flat with command. "If the custodian relay exists, it's our only chance to transmit the slate before the grid burns." We reached the door and began to clear the rubble. Each stone came away slick with condensation, the walls sweating as though alive. The air grew humid, thick enough to taste iron, ozone, and that same faint sweetness that marked every Tyranid's approach. Merrill tried to help, but his strength failed. I caught him as he fell, feeling the strange heat radiating from his body. His pulse was too fast, the rhythm wrong. The spore infection was accelerating. He gripped my forearm, his nails digging through the armor seals. "If I slow you down," he whispered, "you leave me." "I won't," I said. But the hum answered for me, already turning my denial into a lie. We forced the door open. The passage beyond was narrow and black, lined with forgotten statues of saints whose faces had eroded into smooth anonymity. The floor was uneven, slick with something organic. I wiped my glove across it. A thin membrane still warm. A feeding passage. The swarm had already begun to repurpose the cathedral's foundation into nutrient conduits. The walls themselves were turning into the enemy. Halfway down, a light flickered. Not lumen, not fire. Gold. A halo pulse that shimmered for an instant before fading. It came again. Rhythmic. Distant. Rin saw it too. The relay, he breathed. For a heartbeat we both believed it. Then, the hum rose again, sharper now, carrying a sound within it. Clicks, scraping, and the faint chitter that means something hungry is listening. Merrill stumbled, falling hard against the wall. His skin was slick now, translucent in the flickering light. Beneath it I saw motion, veins pulsing not with blood, but something else. I reached for him, but he pushed me back, shaking his head. "Run," he said, and the word came out as a hiss, a merging of voice and static. Then he convulsed, his back arching as if pulled upward by invisible strings. The hum spiked. I heard bones snap like twigs under pressure. His eyes rolled white, and something beneath his skin shifted, writhing. Rin raised his weapon, but I stopped him. Not out of mercy, out of terror. Because I saw recognition in Merrill's face, even as it broke. He was still there for a breath, pleading silently. Then the thing inside him tore through. There was no scream. Just a wet sound and then silence. The walls shuddered as if acknowledging the birth. Rin fired. The blast lit the tunnel in white fire, painting the stone with steam. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left of Merrill but armor shards fused into the wall. I wanted to pray, but no words came. The hum softened, almost tender now, as though the hive itself approved. We kept moving. We had to. The light ahead pulsed again, faint, gold, unreal. The air grew colder. I thought of the Colonel's last words. Rumor, not promise. And still, even as the world above was eaten, we followed the rumor deeper into the dark. The tunnel angled down until the air thinned to something you could chew more than breathe. The stone gave way to alloy, then to strata that should not have existed in any man-made structure. The hum underfoot no longer felt like machinery. It had texture, a heartbeat that wasn't ours. Rin's lumen flickered across a sigil stamped into the wall, its edges half dissolved but still legible. The twin-headed Aquila, wings drooping as if bent under some unseen weight. Beneath it a smaller inscription, Custodia Vigilant. The phrase made the hair rise at my neck. It meant we were close, either to salvation or to blasphemy. We entered a chamber wide enough to house a shuttle. The ceiling curved away into darkness. Ribs of stone and bone fused together in obscene geometry. In the center stood a console ringed with pillars that had once been marble, but were now encased in resin. The console still glowed, faint and steady, an impossible pulse of imperial light surviving inside a Tyranid womb. I felt drawn toward it like a moth to a dying flame. Rin reached it first. He stripped his gloves and brushed dust from the surface, revealing a recessed seal, the sigil of the Adeptus Custodes, overlaid with the secondary mark of the Astra Telepathica, a custodian relay. Real, not rumor. He turned to me, eyes wet in the flicker of our failing lumens. The Colonel wasn't mad, he said, and for the first time since the invasion began, his voice carried wonder instead of defiance. We placed the data slate on the relay. Its surface shimmered, words cascading in columns of green that rippled into gold as the system woke. I watched the text translate itself into binaric cant, then into High Gothic, the characters flickering like candlelight. A voice emerged from the machine, not human, not entirely mechanical either. It was slow, layered, each syllable sliding against the next like steel plates shifting. Signal received. Identify. Rin hesitated. 117th Palatine Infantry, Sergeant Rin Halvern, Planetary Defense. The voice repeated his rank as if tasting it. Acknowledged. This relay is restricted. Custodian oversight protocol in effect. State authorization. Rin looked at me, the lines on his face deepening. We have none, he said softly. The relay paused. The hum beneath the floor seemed to lean in, listening. Then the voice said, Authorization unnecessary. Transmission priority. Exterminatus contingency. The words froze the blood in my veins. Rin stepped back, shaking his head. No, that's not. But the relay was already running. Symbols flared across its screen, streams of encrypted data flooding into the ether. Somewhere above, us far beyond sight, a signal was leaving the planet. A call to fire, a request for annihilation. The hive must have felt it too. The hum shifted pitch, violent now, vibrating through every joint and wall. Chitin cracked like thunder. The resin around the pillars began to melt, dripping in viscous cords. Rin slammed his fist on the console, trying to halt the transmission. We're still here, he shouted. There are thousands. The machine didn't answer. The light intensified until it hurt to look at. I grabbed Rin's shoulder, tried to pull him back, but he resisted, shouting curses that vanished under the rising roar. A sound like wind filled the chamber, except it wasn't wind. It was pressure. The hive was coming for its wound. The first tendril pierced through the ceiling, thick as a transport hull, spraying molten resin as it writhed. Another followed, then another, their tips unfurling into feeder mouths that screamed without air. Rin raised his weapon, but the recoil was meaningless against mass that regenerated faster than fire could consume it. I saw his silhouette swallowed in steam, heard him cry out once, then nothing. I ran. Not by choice, not by courage, but because instinct pushed harder than faith. The data slate still hung at my chest, burning with heat from the relay's light. The tunnel behind me collapsed in waves. I stumbled through dust and organ smoke, coughing, eyes streaming. The hum followed, no longer beneath me but inside me, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. When I reached the upper corridors again, the world was unrecognizable. The cathedral had become a hive spire, its arches reformed into rib cages, its bells replaced by the beating of membranes. Where statues of saints once stood, growths of pulsing resin shaped themselves into mockeries of devotion. I could still see faces inside them. Pilgrims, soldiers, civilians, all fused, all silent, their eyes open and unblinking. The roof tore away, exposing the night. But the night was gone. The sky itself had been replaced by a canopy of living. Flesh, black-veined and luminous, throbbing with the rhythm of digestion. The stars were gone, eaten or hidden. I could smell the world's end in the air, a sweetness that promised nothing but quiet. I found a vantage on a broken balcony overlooking the Manufactorum ruins. Rivers of bioplasm ran through the streets now, feeding into pools where feeder beasts drank. I could see the feeder ships high above, vast and glistening, their bellies split open to drink the planet's life. Each tendril pulsed, sending waves of light through the veins below like breath through a sleeping giant. And then, for the first time, I saw it. Not a creature, not even a shadow, but a pattern. The movement of everything below was too precise to be chaos. Every tendril, every drone, every particle of decay moved in sync. The hive wasn't just feeding, it was conducting. A planet turned into a single biological symphony, playing itself into silence. The hum reached its peak, and in that sound, I thought I heard the echo of all things, the laughter of children, the clash of metal, the hymns of 1,000 congregations, all reduced, compressed, and harmonized into a single perfect tone. The sound of everything being known by something vast enough to devour it. My knees gave way. I pressed my hands to my helmet and tried to shut it out. But the vibration went through the bone, through thought. It wasn't sound anymore. It was instruction. Surrender. Join. Be unmade. Then somewhere in the static, the relay's last transmission cut through. A single line, faint and almost human. Exterminatus confirmed. The hum stopped. The sky burned white. The light erased color first, then shadow, until the world became a single blank page written in pain. Sound arrived late, rolling, breaking, folding through itself in waves that shattered glass and bone alike. I fell without direction, weightless in the heat, until something hard found me. My armor smoked, my breath a metallic hiss in the rebreather. For a moment I thought I'd died, that the Emperor had finally drawn the curtain closed. But death, when it came, would not have smelled like this. Ion and ozone, the scorched sweetness of vaporized promethium. I forced my eyes open. The sky was no longer a canopy of living flesh. It was flame, a corona stretching from horizon to horizon, painting everything in the color of ending. The exterminatus had begun. I had seen orbital bombardments before, even felt the tremors of cyclonic torpedoes from miles away. But this was different. This was deliberate erasure, holy and terrible. Each impact didn't just destroy, it corrected. The planet was being rewritten in light. The manufactorum where I'd fought was gone, replaced by a crater filled with fire and glass. The cathedral was collapsing, its bones turning molten. The hymn of the hive cut short in a scream that became steam. The Tyranid vessels above writhed, their feeder tendrils retracting as if in agony, but it was too late. The atmosphere itself was burning. The swarm was being consumed along with us, and for the first time since the sky broke, the hum was silent. I tried to stand. My limbs moved without order. My vision a tunnel of red and white. Somewhere ahead, beyond the haze, a ridge of shattered stone still stood. Perhaps the last unburned piece of this world. I crawled toward it, dragging the data slate by its strap. It was cracked now, half of its runes burned out but still pulsing faintly. Every few seconds it whispered fragments of the relay's final words, fragments of code dissolving into static prayers. I didn't know if anyone would ever hear it. Maybe no one would. Maybe that was mercy. The heat intensified until even thought felt fragile. I peeled my gloves off, the ceramite layers blistering against skin. The ground trembled in constant rhythm, not as before. This wasn't the heartbeat of the hive anymore. It was the planet itself convulsing, breaking under the pressure of annihilation. Fissures opened in long, radiant veins, spilling light rather than lava. Each pulse cast silhouettes across the horizon, brief flickering ghosts of the dead. In that light I saw movement. Not Tyranid, not human either. A silhouette too tall, too still, standing against the wind. Gold reflected faintly where no gold should have survived. I blinked, but it didn't vanish. It stood on the ridge, framed by fire, unmoving as if carved from the light itself. I stumbled toward it, each step slower than the last. My body screamed, lungs filled with ash, but I kept moving because I had to know. Because if a custodian had survived, then the Emperor had not entirely turned his gaze away. The ridge was closer now, the air peeling from my armor in molten ribbons. When I reached it, I fell to my knees. It wasn't a custodian. It was armor, empty, half fused into the rock. The figure had been real once, yes, but now it was nothing more than a gilded shell. The helmet was turned upward. Visor melted into a single glassy eye reflecting the inferno. Inside only dust, yet the air around it vibrated faintly, like the last note of a song that refused to die. I rested my forehead against the armor, and for the first time in all the noise I prayed, not for rescue, not even for forgiveness, but for remembrance, that somewhere, somehow this world's death would be known as something more than a statistic in the Administratum's archives, that the Emperor would remember the names of those who died holding the line, even if only as a whisper in the Astronomican's endless song. The ground convulsed again, throwing me back. The horizon tore open, and from its wound rose a wave of light brighter than thought. It wasn't fire, it was purity, raw and absolute. The Exterminatus warhead had reached the planet's core, the crust split like the lid of a tomb, molten stone surging upward in a crown of annihilation. I covered my eyes, but the light went through my hands, through my lids, through everything. It wasn't blinding anymore, it was clarity. I saw for a moment the entire planet from above, the oceans turning to vapor, the continents curling into ash, the hive fleet disintegrating into cinders that drifted like dust among the stars. I saw the Imperial ships in orbit, their silhouettes sharp against the dying world, firing one last volley in salute or in duty. I couldn't tell which. And then I saw nothing. No sound. No motion, only the hum returning, not as before, not alien but familiar. The same hum that had filled the barracks at the start, the same tone that had carried through every lumen strip and every whispered prayer. It wasn't the hive. It wasn't machinery. It was memory, the resonance of all things returning to their origin. I floated in it, weightless, thoughtless. I didn't know if I was alive or just refusing to end. Time lost shape. The hum rose, then fell like breath. Somewhere in its depth I heard voices, not screaming, not mourning, but reciting. The benediction of light again and again, merging into the sound of 1,000 heartbeats fading into one. When I opened my eyes, if eyes still mattered, I saw the void. Cold, endless, and beautiful, the planet was gone. Only debris remained, drifting in slow orbit, illuminated by the faint gold shimmer of the dying sun. The data slate still pulsed at my chest, impossibly. I touched it and it responded with a single line of text before the screen went dark. Signal archived. Perhaps that meant someone somewhere had heard. Perhaps it was only a ghost of code echoing into infinity. Either way, it was enough. I looked once more at the empty armor of the custodian, half buried in molten glass, and imagined the figure standing there eternal, a sentinel carved in the memory of what was lost. My voice cracked, but I spoke anyway, because words deserved to exist even when worlds did not. By the throne's light, I whispered, we endure. And in the silence that followed, the hum faded at last, leaving only the stars and the promise that even in consumption, something of us remained. When light returned, it came without warmth, a pale shimmer through smoke and frozen ash, filtering across a landscape that should not have existed. I remember thinking that the world must have ended, that there could be nothing left to wake into. Yet here I was, half buried in glass, lungs drawing air that burned like promethium fumes. Every breath an act of defiance against extinction itself. The Exterminatus had scoured everything. The air hung still, stripped of sound. Even the echoes of impact had been devoured. Only my heartbeat persisted, Slow, stubborn, a drum beneath the ruin. I pushed myself upright, shards of vitrified soil crackling under my palms. My armor was scorched black, edges fused, the aquila across my chest plate barely visible. Through the haze I saw nothing that resembled terrain, only a plain of fused mineral and twisted silhouettes where cities had stood. I don't know how long I walked before the horizon shifted. Time was fluid here. The sun had dimmed to a copper ember and the sky moved like oil across water. Eventually I saw motion. Not in the air, not above, but beneath the glass. Something pulsed deep below, faintly luminous, like veins still feeding even after the body was dead. I knelt and pressed my gauntlet to the surface. It was warm, alive. That was when I understood. The swarm had survived, not as beasts or armies, but as residue. The Tyranids' genius had always been adaptation. They consumed worlds not only to feed, but to seed. The glass plane trembled under my hand with microscopic motion, the slow, patient breathing of spores rebuilding themselves from nothing. The exterminatus had burned the surface, yes, but beneath, in the buried strata of flesh and bone, something continued to digest. I stumbled backward, my reflection jagged in the molten mirror of the earth. The hum was gone, replaced by a different rhythm, subterranean, softer, a heartbeat muffled by stone. I told myself it was imagination, a phantom echo, but when I lifted my gaze, the horizon shivered. Pockets of the ground bulged like blisters, faintly red beneath the ash. The planet was still being eaten. I ran. I don't remember choosing to. My legs simply moved, driven by something older than thought. Each step cracked the crust, releasing plumes of steam that smelled of rot and ammonia. I passed what might have been a hab tower once, now a column of fused skeletons, each face melted into the next. The sight barely registered. Fear had dulled into something quieter, acceptance perhaps. When a man has watched his world die once, what's left to fear except the silence that follows? Still, I kept running until my body gave out. I collapsed beside a fissure where the heat vented upward in crimson mist. Through the vapor, I saw movement again, shapes crawling within the crack. Not Tyranids as I knew them, but larval, unfinished. The tendrils writhed sluggishly as if dreaming themselves into form. I remembered the words of an old Magos biologist who had once lectured our regiment before deployment. A hive fleet does not simply consume, it replicates environment. It makes the planet its stomach. And now I was inside that stomach. The thought made me laugh, a dry, cracked sound that startled even me. The Vox unit in my helm hissed with static. I toggled it out of habit, though no signal could possibly reach the void. Trooper Loran Vex, I said into the emptiness. Survivor of nothing, bearing one dead world's memory. The line swallowed my voice, but then faintly an echo, not my own, a whisper through static, almost too soft to discern. It wasn't language, not truly, just the shape of sound, like someone breathing between words. My hand froze on the Vox control. Adjusted frequency, heart hammering. The whisper sharpened, became fragments of syllables. Vex, if you can. Hold Rin's voice, it couldn't be. I'd watched him vanish under molten resin. I turned, scanning the barren horizon, as though the act of looking might rewrite reality. The Vox sputtered again, then silence. No coordinates, no signal origin. Just his name and mine shared between the dead. Hope is the cruelest of survival instincts. It makes corpses walk. I reoriented north toward the remains of the Manufactorum Ridge. If any structure had survived the bombardment, it would be there. I trudged across the plain, each step sinking slightly as the crust softened beneath heat still rising from below. Occasionally I glimpsed veins of bioluminescence under the surface, spreading outward like infection. The Tyranid digestion pools were reforming, slow and silent. The planet was feeding itself its own ashes. Night fell, or something like it. The sun dimmed completely. leaving only the dull glow of molten fissures and the faint shimmer of spore light. I built no camp, there was no point. Sleep would have meant vulnerability, and I had already seen what the swarm did to those who stopped moving. Instead, I sat on the ridge and listened. Far beneath, the hum had returned. Not the hive's chorus, not yet, but an embryonic echo of it. It came in intervals, like the breathing of something still dreaming its hunger awake. I stared into the horizon and tried to remember the sky before all this. The blue, the clouds, the sound of rain on Hab rooftops. But memory, I discovered, erodes faster than flesh. I thought of Rin's voice again. The impossible call from the void. Could the Vox have caught a transmission bouncing off debris in orbit? Could his signal have survived somehow? Refracted through the relay's dying burst? I didn't know. But I had nothing else left to follow. The fissures ahead widened into valleys glowing faintly red, their edges rimed with crystallized ash. From within came faint movement, soft, slithering, rhythmic, feeding. I followed one ridge until it opened into a basin the size of a small city. There at the center was the first of the digestion pools. It was beautiful in a way only death can be. A perfect circle pulsing gently, its surface shimmering with color like oil on water. The liquid wasn't fire or acid. It was something slower, thicker, alive. The corpses of trees, Hab structures, even a derelict basilisk tank floated halfway dissolved, their outlines blurring into the fluid as if the pool were painting them into itself. The air above it shimmered with heat. But beneath that heat came another sensation, familiar, almost musical. The hum again, clearer now, resonating through the bones of the earth. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed not by fear, but by awe. The swarm was rebuilding from nothing. Even exterminatus could not kill hunger. The Tyranids would return, or rather, they had never truly left. The planet was already becoming one of them, and I, by standing here breathing this air, was part of its rebirth. The realization hollowed me. I removed my helmet, letting the air burn my lungs raw. The taste was sweet and metallic. I stared into the pool until my reflection disappeared and the surface began to ripple. Not from wind, but from within. Shapes rose beneath the film. Hands, faces, fragments of what had been human. Their eyes opened, luminous and wrong. I stumbled back, choking on my breath. The hum crescendoed, a living choir rising from beneath the surface, and for one delirious instant, I thought I heard words forming within it, familiar ones, broken and overlapping. We endure. We endure. I fell backward, slamming against rock, and the world went black again. When I awoke, the pool was gone. Only steam remained. The data slate at my chest still pulsed faintly, and on its cracked surface new symbols glowed. Coordinates. Not random, not repeating. A beacon, perhaps. Or bait. Either way, I started walking again. The coordinates dragged my steps across a plain that had once been a city's heart. I recognized nothing but the geometry of ruin. Avenues become rivers of glass. Plazas pressed into shallow bowls where heat had lingered longest. A forest of rebar ribs clawing at a sky that would not answer. The slate ticked each degree with patient certainty, an artificial heartbeat refusing to sync with the softer pulse rising from the planet below. Every so often the crust flexed beneath me, a slow breath, and I had to pause until the world stilled, counting by habit. 3 in, 3 held, 3 out, like the drill sergeants taught us for smoke and fear. It didn't work. The air here didn't carry fear. It carried sugar-rotten sweetness and the faint metallic taste of new blood. By the time I reached the old transit causeway, night had thinned to a pale smear. The causeway arched over a valley that should have been stone, and was instead a trembling field of translucent film stretched taut over moving shapes. A step on the span sent ripples through that membrane below, the motion passing outward in perfect rings. Something responded many meters down, an answering swell, not hostile, merely aware. The slate's arrow nudged me forward. I crossed at a walk that felt too loud, boots ticking like a metronome on a tomb. The far end terminated at a vault door, blackened but intact, its imperial aquila warped into a bird that had learned to breathe this new air. The coordinates resolved to a point no more than an arm's length from the lock. I wiped ash from the plate and found a set of tiny prayer scratches around the rim. Pilgrim work, a rosary carved in steel. Below them, a strip of copper still gleamed. I thumbed the slate awake, coaxed its remaining power into a handshake with the contact. The door shivered. Something clicked inside, delicate, almost polite, and the seal parted a finger's width, exhaling air cold enough to cloud my visor. Within, darkness. But it was human darkness. Angular, measured, filled with the smell of machine oil and old parchment rather than wet resin. I slid through, dragging the door behind me until the seal met with a soft kiss. The hum damped as if a heavy blanket had been thrown over my skull. The sudden absence made my knees wobble. I leaned on the wall and laughed once, short and ugly, at the feeling of being alone with my thoughts again. The lumen strips here were dead, but their housings remained. The kind stamped by the administratum and nailed into basements on 1,000 worlds. I smashed one open, bridged wires with a blade edge, and teased a glow from tired capacitors. Light spilled along a corridor lined with lockers. Names were stenciled on their mouths, flaking paint on corroded tags. Adepts, engine seers, a provost. And there, Merit Archives O2C. The slate warmed against my chest. Inside the archive room, cogitator banks crouched like sleeping beasts. Dust lay thick, untroubled by breath for years. I powered a unit with a hand crank and a prayer that would have made a Ministorum clerk cry. Runes blossomed across the display, hesitant at first, then steadying as if pleased someone finally remembered their language. I slotted the slate into a reader port. The cogitator chirred, then spoke in a vox dry as salt. Cross-reference authorized. Local records available. Not the custodian relay, but a voice. Any voice that wasn't mine or the hive's felt like company worth kneeling for. I asked it for inbound transmissions on the day of ending. It coughed up a handful of corrupted packets in one clean burst, tagged with an encryption header I recognized from the command net. I asked for plaintext. It returned a single line. Vex, if you can hear this, follow the lightless road. Rin. It wasn't a trick of debris or an echo. He had sent this here, to this archive where no one living would think to dig. The lightless road? I tasted the phrase. In Palatine drills, that was old station slang for de-energized transit tunnels. Maintenance arteries under the hive, used to move men and munitions when the lumen grid failed. But the grid had failed forever now. Every road was lightless. Map request, I told the machine. Transit, sub-basement, manufactorum quarter. The cogitator mulled. After a stubborn pause, a cartograph bloomed. A web of lines nodding beneath the city. One was highlighted in pale ghost lumen, running parallel to the causeway I had crossed, then plunging beneath the valley membrane toward a sector marked with a glyph I hadn't expected to see. A custodial chevron. Not the aquila, not the sigil of local law, but the mark used to designate do not alter in systems older than the colony itself. The lightless road? The slate pulsed agreement against my ribs, a small, eager heartbeat. I could have stayed. The vault had air, insulation against the heat, silence like a cure, but silence in a world being digested is a lie with good manners. I scavenged a canteen from a locker, metal warm to the touch but unwarped. A pack of ration wafers fossilized into something that might once have been food, a coil of filament line and a battered auspex whose range would embarrass a child. Before I left, I set the cogitator to loop the clean packet through whatever aerials still poked their heads from the ash. A weak repeating call in Rin's voice in case anyone else still wandered this grave. A foolish act. A kind one. Sometimes those are the same. The lightless road's entrance lay through a maintenance hatch in the archive's rear wall. Bolted, prayer-sealed, then sealed again with another hands-shaking script. Forgive. I broke both. The shaft beyond smelled of cold water and old iron. The ladder rungs bit rust into my gloves. My boots found a ledge submerged in inches of black seep. When I pulled the hatch closed above me, the last of the world's faint pallor vanished and the dark became complete enough to taste. I let it sit on my tongue a moment, then switched on my helmet lamp and watched a column of breath rise like a ghost. The tunnel had not yet been found by the swarm. No resin bulges, no pulsing membranes, no feathers of feeder filament. But the earth remembered what slept above. Fine ash had sifted through hairline cracks and settled into dunes. Each step left a clean boot print that looked obscene on this untroubled floor. My lamp picked out stenciled designations every dozen meters. HV02, HV03, marching in order. At HV07, the wall shivered subtly beneath my hand as if something far off had taken a breath. I killed the light and listened. Nothing but the slow drip of condensation and the carousel turn of my own blood in my ears. Rin, I said into the vox, my voice small in the sealed world. I'm on the road you named. If you live, if you don't, I'm still moving. Static answered, soft and even like cloth being folded. I followed the line markers until the tunnel reached a junction. One branch continued straight, narrowing. The other curved down into older stone, the kind laid when the colony was more hope than industry. The auspex complained at both, then surrendered to irrelevance. The slate ticked once, then lay quiet, as if trusting me to read the shape of the earth without its help. I stood in the tea of it, breathing, tasting the air. The left-hand tunnel smelled faintly of rot. The right smelled of old water and something else, ozone maybe, or the memory of lightning. I took the right-hand run. If there is a theology to survival, it is built on the sacrament of choosing the air that doesn't already belong to a stomach. After 20 minutes, the tunnel opened into a machine hall whose ceiling had caved in years ago, and then sealed itself under a spill of hardened slag. In the center stood a rusted service cart on rails, its battery box split open. The Emperor's face on its devotional plaque rubbed bare by thousands of fingers. Above it, etched into the wall with a knife, 4 words, hold fast. I wait. The last scrawl trailed off mid-stroke as if the hand that wrote it had been pulled away, or had simply ceased to be hand. I circled once, checking shadows with the ritual paranoia that keeps men alive. No feeder blooms, no chitin residue. Only quiet. Only the thought, unavoidable as thirst, that Rin had been here, had breathed the same stale air, had left those words for someone who might never come. I sat on the cart's lip and let the lamp fade to a thread. In the near dark, the old ache returned. The barracks lumen hum remembered not by ear but by bone, a comfort and a curse. I let it rise, then put words where it would have been, the ones the chaplain drilled into us until we could speak them with our mouths full of dust. By the throne's light, we endure. I didn't expect an answer. So the answer, when it came, was a blade under the thought, not from the vox, not from the tunnel mouth, from the wall itself in a voice too soft to be anything but close. Endure, then. I stood so fast my joints barked. The lamp flared. The wall was only wall. The hum was only memory. But the air had cooled by a degree that could not be imagination, and the cart's devotional plaque, bare a heartbeat ago, now held the ghost of an image, not scratched or painted, but spared from rust, in the shape of a 2-headed bird whose wings drooped as if tired, and a small line beneath, pristine amidst decay, Vex. I did not move for a long time. The name on the plaque could have been coincidence or pareidolia conjured by exhaustion, yet the letters were clean, the metal untouched by corrosion, as though the universe had reached in and scrubbed them for me alone. My lamp trembled in my hand. I reached out and traced the groove with one finger, half expecting the wall to recoil like flesh. It stayed cold, obedient stone. The hum returned. Not through the air this time, but inside my teeth. An intimate resonance that turned breath into vibration. It carried no melody, only suggestion, like the shape of a word whispered underwater. I switched off the lamp and the dark thickened until I could feel it pressing against my skin. Within that pressure came images, not sight but memory peeled open. Rin's hand on the grenade pin, the Colonel's dying eyes, Meryl's laughter before the infection took him. I thought of the child swallowed by the fissure. Each recollection flickered once and went out, leaving a taste of iron. Endure then, the voice had said. The hum deepened as if in approval. I couldn't tell whether it belonged to the hive's echo or something older, something wearing its skin. The cart's rail line continued through a breach where the ceiling had collapsed. I crawled over the slag, boots slipping on glassy residue until I reached the other side. The tunnel widened into what might once have been a transit hub. Dozens of tracks merged here, their surfaces warped but still recognizable. Hanging from the center arch was a great rusted icon, Saint Elian again. Though the saint's face had been melted into anonymity, his halo now a corona of fused bone. The ash on the floor was knee-deep. My steps raised ghosts. Halfway across the hall, the ground shifted beneath me. I froze. A low groan rose from the substructure, followed by a wet crack. A seam split open at my feet, spilling a trickle of viscous fluid that glowed faintly blue. I backed away, heart hammering. The fissure widened. Within its depths, shapes stirred, small, worm-like, translucent. They writhed in the glow, blind mouths opening and closing. For a heartbeat, I saw faces among them, impossibly human, forming and dissolving in the same motion. I stumbled backward, tripped on a rail, and landed hard. The fluid splashed outward, spattering my armor. It hissed against the scorched ceramite, chewing into the outer layer like acid. I rolled, wiping it off with my gloves, which began to smoke instantly. The smell was unbearable, sweet, chemical, intimate. I tore the gloves away and stared at my hands. Tiny patches of skin had turned translucent, pulsing faintly with the same blue light. I pressed my palms against the cold stone to extinguish it, but the light only spread beneath the surface, sinking inward. I forced myself to breathe slowly. The infection wasn't immediate. If it were Tyranid assimilation, I would already be part of the floor. This was something else, something unfinished. I tore a strip from the rations wrapper and bound my hands, whispering the litany of cleansing between each knot. The words helped only because they gave my mouth something to do other than scream. The fissure sealed itself almost immediately after, the stone knitting closed as though ashamed of what it had shown me. The hum receded again, leaving only the sound of my pulse. When I finally looked up, I noticed a faint glow on the far wall, an aperture where light leaked through, rhythmic, pulsing. I approached it carefully. Beyond was a shaft descending at a steep angle, lined with metallic veins that shimmered in the blue half-light. The slate vibrated against my chest, weak but steady, pointing downward. The descent was slick with condensation. I used the filament line to lower myself, boots scraping on the ribbed metal. Halfway down, the air changed, denser, humid, alive. I could smell it now, the unmistakable musk of organic matter being processed. The sound came next, faint but growing, a slow churning rhythm like digestion. At the bottom lay a cavern, the roof arched high above, glittering with condensation that caught my light in 100 trembling points. The ground was uneven, covered in a carpet of fibrous material that yielded underfoot. At the center of the space pulsed a mound, part flesh, part crystal, translucent and alive. Veins of blue light ran through it like circuits. I realized what I was seeing. A gestation node. The first stage of planetary rebirth. I should have turned back. Every training instinct screamed at me to flee, to seal the shaft and pray for fire from the void. But I couldn't look away. The node throbbed gently, rhythmically like a heartbeat. My heartbeat synchronized without consent. As I watched, something shifted within its core. The outline of a body formed, curled, human-shaped, but not human. I took a step closer, then another, drawn forward despite myself. The translucent surface rippled, and for a moment the face within became clear. It was Rin. I fell to my knees, choking on air that suddenly seemed too thick to swallow. The likeness was perfect. The scar across the brow, the jaw clenched even in rest. But the skin shimmered faintly, the veins beneath it glowing with that same soft blue. The hum rose around me, wrapping thought in cotton. I pressed a hand against the node's surface. It was warm, and when I touched it, the eyes opened. They were not his eyes. Vex, the mouth said, though the lips didn't move. The sound came through the floor, through my bones. You followed, good. I tore my hand away and stumbled back. The body inside shifted slightly, and the hum deepened into a vibration that shook dust from the ceiling. We endure, it said again, softer now, almost tender. The phrase that had once been prayer now sounded like invitation.